So, if you've been around the channel for a minute, you've probably picked up on the fact that I'm a bit of a Monster Hunter mark. It's one of my favorite franchises. It's got some of my most favorite gameplay mechanics across any kind of action game. I just love every new entry to bits. But I gotta admit, even a huge fan such as myself has to acknowledge the fact that the most recent entry, Monster Hunter Wilds, does have a handful of problems. And there's actually one problem in particular that I want to dive into a little bit today, and that is the seamless, quote unquote, open world nature of the game's level design. Because to be frank, I feel like the game just doesn't really incorporate this new mechanic all that well into its gameplay, and if anything, it might actually take away more from the game than it adds. Now, just to be perfectly clear as to what I'm referring to, I'm not talking about the removal of the loading zones between areas on the map while you're hunting, which happened back in Monster Hunter World. You know, we used to have that in the classic games, and I always personally found it kind of a little annoying and disruptive to constantly be going through all these loading zones every time a monster changed areas, and I personally think that that did nothing but add to the series. No, what I'm talking about today is the fact that you can be in camp, you know, eating food, getting your quests and everything, then seamlessly transition from your camp to the hunting area, do a hunt, physically walk to an entirely different map, and then go to that map's campsite, all without entering a single load screen. Now, that is a fun feature to have on the back of the box, and I mean, I guess it's kind of nice to not have to go through any loading screens for all of that stuff, but at the end of the day, this mechanic I feel is incredibly underutilized. Now, let's start by talking about some of the performance problems, because this is also one of the other biggest problems with Monster Hunter Wilds, and that's the fact that the game runs like ass. Like, to be fair, it's a fairly complicated problem. There's a lot of different factors that play into this. I'm not going to say that the seamless open world is the only reason why it has such a problem running on lower end hardware, but I have to imagine it can't exactly help either. Like, when you think about it, because of the seamless nature, that means that every time you're in camp, it's also loading up the entire hunting area and all of the monsters and all of the endemic life that are within that hunting area. So not only do you have all of the NPCs that are wandering around the camp, cooking food and, you know, selling you items and whatnot, that you have to worry about the processor keeping managing and everything, but you also have all of the monsters and everything also taking up processor space. And I have to imagine that, considering that CPU usage is one of the biggest bottlenecks in this game's performance problems, that it's definitely not making the situation any better. And it's made worse by the fact that they've added even more monsters to the map now. Like previous games, you would be limited to like three big monsters on the map at a time and then only a handful of smaller monsters. But now you can have like four, five, even more large monsters on the map all at once. And then they added entire herds of monsters that could be loaded at once. You might have a huge herd of small monsters and a huge herd of like Doshigama and all of those things all at the same time as they're loading all of the NPCs in the base camps. Like, it's no wonder that this game has performance problems. Like, it would be one thing if they added the seamless open world or the monster herd systems, like, in solo, but the fact that they added both at the same time with this brand new entry, it really does feel like they bit off a lot more than they could chew. But even if we put aside the performance problems and just imagine a magical fantasy land where Monster Hunter Wilds actually runs at a reasonable frame rate on most hardware, wouldn't that be great? The game just doesn't actually utilize this mechanic very well in the first place. Like, for example, with the base camps, like, the base camps are already secluded away in their own sort of corners of the map, anyways. So, yes, they are on the same map as the monsters, like technically, but it doesn't affect the gameplay in any way. It's not like the monsters can be chased into your base camp where you have to like defend the other NPCs or maybe even get help from some of the other hunters in the base camp as they all attack the monster at the same time. Like that could maybe make for a cool moment if a monster like Seregios or something could swing by the base camp and now you have to actually hunt it where you would normally be like crafting your armor and eating your food and stuff. But again, that just doesn't happen. And it gets even worse when you look at it from the perspective of transitioning between maps, because all that they really did was make it so that there are these tiny little corridors that connect each map, and it's very obviously just a loading hallway. Like every single one of these paths that goes from one map to the next is just this very small tight corridor that has very high walls and is a little bit windy because they're very obviously just unloading the previous map and then loading in the next map. So it is functionally still a loading screen. It's just a loading screen that you can walk through. It doesn't really add anything, and it's just like the most boring way to implement this kind of seamless map transition. Like I could imagine a version of this that could actually be really cool, where instead of having four very distinct separated maps that are connected by these tiny hallways, maybe you could instead, it would be way cooler if it was one gigantic map that was split up into like four different biomes. And then on top of that, so like that, not only would that allow you to have much more seamless transitions where you just walk in one direction and you go from like the desert map to the forest map or whatever, but you could also have monsters themselves cross between zones. Like that could actually be a really cool like hunting mechanic where you could start hunting a monster in the desert area and then chase it through the forest until you eventually end up, finishing the hunt in the frozen city area. Like that would actually like make the hunts feel a lot more dramatic, like you're chasing this monster across the entire planet to hunt it down. But instead every monster sticks to its main zone, so there's really like the way that these zones affect gameplay is almost non-existent. And non existent is probably the right word to use here because ultimately, when you look at how people play this game, as well as the fact that the game has a fast travel mechanic, at the end of the day, the mechanic just may as well not exist in the first place. Like, imagine I'm in the desert zone and I want to get to the forest zone to do a certain hunt in order to get some materials for my armor or whatever, right? I could walk from the base camp in the desert area onto the desert map, get to the loading hallway, walk through the loading hallway, get into the forest area, and then walk from there to the forest area's base camp so I can then take a quest in that zone. Or, if I'm a sane person, I could just teleport to the forest area base camp and then do the quest from there. Hell, I don't even have to teleport first. I can take the quest in the desert area and then teleport to wherever the quest is going to be on the other map and then get straight into it. And like even if I'm doing a quest on the same map as the one I'm currently in, even then chances are I won't do the seamless map transition from the base camp to the hunting area, because the only time that you can actually do that is if you're hunting a monster that is already loaded in the camp. But say I need to hunt an Arkveld or something and there isn't an Arkveld currently on the map, well then I have to load up a stored quest or an investigation or whatever and then use that quest in order to hunt an Arkveld, which means that the game now has to unload everything that's currently on the desert map and then load in the new version of the map with the monster I'm actually going to go hunt. So at the end of the day, we still end up encountering loading zones basically as often as we would normally in any other Monster Hunter game. And it's made even more laughable by the fact that we now have the Grand Hub, and the Grand Hub is nice. I like that it's actually finally a proper like gathering hub in the game, but it's actually also fully disconnected from any of the maps. So there's literally zero ways to get from the Grand Hub to any of the hunting areas. So once you beat the game and you get to the end game, well, chances are you're just going to end up staying at the Grand Hub most of the time between hunts. And then now the seamless map transitions are just basically removed entirely. So yeah, whether we're talking about the performance issues or the way that the gameplay was designed or just how people actually play the game, the seamless map mechanic of Monster Hunter Wilds is just not implemented well at all in my opinion. It's just way too inconvenient to use, and the game barely even utilizes it in the first place. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I feel like they actually kinda did a better version of this sort of idea back in Iceborne, the DLC for Monster Hunter World, where they had the Guiding Lands. Now, the Guiding Lands had some of its own problems back in the day, but at least in terms of this sort of seamless transition between biomes idea, it was a much better idea, or at least a much better implemented version of this idea, in my opinion. You actually had one big map that had a bunch of very small zones, but you could at least seamlessly walk from a desert area to a forest area to an ice area and so on, and it would be done a lot more smoothly, and monsters could actually travel between the zones to give you that more dynamic hunt. But, you know, that was also a much smaller scale version of the idea. Like, if I were hoping for something in, I guess, Wilds' DLC expansion, maybe they could go a little bit more further in on this idea and expand it into a giant version of the Guiding Lands, where each biome actually feels like a full-sized map, but it actually transitions seamlessly and smoothly between the biomes instead of using these really tiny, boring loading hallways. Like either you got to put your whole ass into the idea, right? Not half-assing it. Either go all the way in having this gigantic open world map with all of the different biomes that are actually connected to each other, or just go back to having normal maps that are disconnected from base camps, because that's functionally how people are going to be playing this game anyways. One direction or the other. Don't go halfway in between and give us something that's just the worst of both worlds. But as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. Feel free to let me know what you think about the level design in Monster Hunter Wilds and some of the problems therein, as well as any of the other mechanics that you maybe have some critiques for, because, yeah, I may still enjoy the game as a whole, I still think the combat is just as good as ever, but I gotta say, you know, you gotta critique the things that you love, or else they'll never have any reason to make them any better. But as always, if you like the video, make sure to leave me a like, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this in the future, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Thank you all for watching.